This is Prompting Potential, where we step into the world of entrepreneurs, innovators inside and outside of organizations who ignite inspiration, fuel innovation, and unleash imagination against all odds. Prompting Potential spotlights incredible individuals and influential ideas at the intersection of leadership, technology, and transformation. I'm Roger Rohatke, the Chief AI Officer at Chai, and you can find us at heychai.ai. I'm Roger Rohatke, and welcome to Prompting Potential. This is the show where we tap into the minds of entrepreneurs, tech mavens, AI mavericks, daring leaders, digital gurus, and design thinkers, the fearless innovators inside and outside organizations who are pushing the boundaries, driving transformation, and turning bold ideas into real-world breakthroughs. Today's episode is all about turning breakthrough ideas into real-world impact and how AI is reshaping what's possible in that journey. I'm thrilled to welcome two incredible guests. Angela Marano, who has been at Southwest for almost 27 years, and most recently the Vice President of AI and Data Transformation, known for leading large-scale intelligent automation and AI programs that are changing how the airline operates from the inside out. And Nicola Smith, Senior AI Programs Advisor at Southwest, recognized for shaping human-centered AI strategies that blend emerging tech with practical, purpose-driven innovation. Together, Angela and Nicola are doing the kind of work that turns complexity into capability at scale. So buckle up. This episode is packed with insights on leading AI in high-stakes environments, designing with empathy, and scaling ideas that actually fly. Let's dive in. Welcome to you both. I'm so glad you're here. I want to hear all about your stories before we jump into any questions that I have and stuff. I want to hear about your backgrounds and different things that have been there to, in your life to get you to where you are today, right? And so I'm so excited. And I want to start with you, Angela, and just walk me through it.
Yeah. So like you said, at Southwest Airlines for almost 27 years, I started in a technology role, helping to build out our enterprise data warehouse back in the day, business intelligence, helping organizations across the company build out their analytic practices, things like that. So at some point shifted more into a strategic role, moved out of technology, and started really thinking about how we leverage all of that data combined with process understanding, other forms of technology, again, to drive efficiency, to drive value and growth. And eventually started to kind of wander into the world of building new capabilities for Southwest. And so proud to say I really helped to start our continuous improvement practice that we had, again, really focusing on process. How can process alone drive value and efficiency and effectiveness? Then wandered into the world of data science and really thinking about, how could we leverage data science, some of these more advanced capabilities with data to drive value. Spent a lot of time there just kind of like demystifying like what even is data science. We held data science fairs to help people even understand its capabilities and what it could do. Then moved into the world of innovation, automation, and then eventually now leading our AI practice and spending a lot of time just, again, trying to figure out how all of these different capabilities, again, not hammer looking for a nail, like what can these things do, but more so what problems do we have to solve? And then how do all of these different things come together to solve and drive value, create change, create transformation and opportunity across the company.
I'm excited about that. And I want to also hear your story as well, Nicola. So many things. We've been talking about how we have so much in common, with our backgrounds. And so, Ivan, tell me more.
Yeah, so my path has been more of a winding road than a straight shot. And I actually started out in film production, doing production design. So definitely on the creative side and the storytelling side. I worked in radio for a little while, and then I found my way into the digital marketing world where I had the opportunity to build a team really focused on emerging trends in technology, media platforms, and consumer behavior. And I'm a sci-fi nerd, so I just kind of followed that path and was really given the opportunity to play with any and all emerging technologies as they came out. And have been able to build a career really focusing on helping companies understand how to leverage emerging trends, emerging technologies, emerging user behavior strategically.
Yeah.
And was lucky enough to be introduced to Angela last year, and it just clicked. I've been really interested in AI, and when I had the opportunity to come to Southwest and help build out this capability, I jumped at it. So very excited to be where I am and to be here today.
I love it. I love it. So, it's interesting because when we were talking, about your past, and, obviously I was in film and radio and television, all these things. And so we were talking about, the importance of story, right? And that story that you tell, whether you bring it to life on the silver screen or whether you do it in a business boardroom, is essential to where we go. And that story is putting the customer or the user at the center of it, right? The hero's journey.
Yep.
How do you view that?
I think it's a core component to success in emerging spaces. I think it's important from a product perspective to be able to put the user in the center as we're actually building solutions. But I also think storytelling is important for the organization because it's part of how we bring leaders along. It's part of how we bring the workforce along, is by showing them what's possible and showing them through story and through narrative and really bringing those examples and use cases to life.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. I mean, that's it, right? So it's not only on the show are we prompting potential, but it's prompting possibilities as well, right? And bringing that stuff to life. So I love that. So I'm going to come back to you, Angela, and we're going to go back and forth, and I'm going to ask you some questions and things. And so, one of the things I wanted to, just dive right into is the sheer scale of what you've been working on and stuff. And so, I took the liberty of putting some questions here that I can ask and stuff. And so, when you think about the scale and how you've scaled automation, right, across large systems, what idea felt the riskiest when you started, but then turned out to be very foundational?
Yeah, I mean, specific to automation, we started with just very basic robotic process automation back in 2018, 2019. And even at that point in time, the conversation was, well, if we bring this automation in, people are going to be afraid that they're going to be replaced. And so now that's really the conversation today with AI. But even back at that time, that was a concern. And so one of the, early days of just setting up that capability, we really had to be mindful of how were we going to work through that change? How were we going to tell the story and bring people along in a way that we could understand what their jobs were and how we could automate what they do, but at the same time, not have them be in fear that, well, if I tell you what I do to automate it, I'm going to go away. And so one of the things that really came out of that was once we started to automate their, pieces and portions of what they did, they realized we were automating the things that they didn't want to do. It was really kind of the mundane, boring, rote tasks that they didn't want to do anyway. So once we could get people to see that and latch onto that, then they started to really be the storytellers of it all because they wanted more. And then that just makes its way across the organization. And people, we had more demand than what we could come up with or what we could keep up with there. So I think the risk was, okay, if we automate, there might be people that are displaced. But the beauty that came out of it was we were really, providing an assistant to them, a digital assistant. And so, again, kind of some scary things going in, but the beauty that came out of it was all well worth it. So
yeah, no, I mean, and there's that story again, the line, that's so important, it seems. And I think it'll be a theme probably through all the things we talk about, but certainly a theme in my life. And even what we're doing at our company, right? Right now we're focused on what we believe that will amplify human potential, right? And this concept of human-centered AI, putting humans at the center. And so, this is a big part of how you believe, right? And so, I guess, when you start with that human insight, because that's kind of how you always seem to lead, it seems. Can you share an idea that came from observing people, not just data, and how that shifted your direction?
Yeah, I can share a recent example. So we've been working on a project. Won't go too deeply into it, but we're building a GPT tool. And one of the things that we started to see in the data during our MVP testing was that people were not trying to upload large files, in part because we have a file size limitation. And these were an MVP test group, so we had let them know there were some limitations to the tool to start. But if we were just looking at the data logs, we could assume that there was no need to upload bigger files because we weren't seeing people attempt that behavior. When we conducted user research, what we found is that people had found a workaround. They had taken large documents, cut them up into smaller documents, turned those into PDFs, and then were uploading the section of the document that they needed to reference or needed information from. So if we were just looking at the data from a product perspective, we might assume we don't need to increase file size capability. And speaking to the users, we found that was only because they had figured out a workaround to the current limitations of the tool. So I think that's a great example of why user research and really understanding users through more qualitative research is really vitally important as we're building products, especially products in a new space that don't have an existing precedent and don't necessarily even have an existing user interface, right? Yeah. So it's a new world. And I would say as we're moving into emerging spaces, user research and testing is even more important than when you're playing in an established space.
Right. No, that's huge. And I think, that insight, right, is what can, if you can keep getting those, it's what can keep accelerating the future of how AI can be integrated into a company, right?
Yeah. Well, and just to expand on that in a totally different space within our company, and this really doesn't even have anything to do with AI, but just in general, really understanding kind of the human need and without research, what path we might have gone down. We had a situation where we had just implemented a big new, main system that our mechanics were using when servicing the aircraft every day. And sometimes you have to service the aircraft in the middle of the day in the operation, and people are waiting for you to finish that work and finish the paperwork. And this new system, they were working on an iPad, and what they were starting to see in some data and some observation was that the mechanics weren't wanting to finish their work right there at the aircraft. They were wanting to go back into the hangar to complete that work. And so they thought, oh, well, the problem is they don't have anywhere to type. This new iPad is new. They don't have anywhere to input this information. So they came to our innovation team saying, hey, is there some sort of table out there that we could implement and put into these jet bridges? And what we did and what we learned was we walked, shadowed what the mechanics were doing. We talked with them. We did this user research, and we identified a number of different things that were driving them to want to go back to the hangar to do their work. One of which was it was new. They didn't understand completely the system. They didn't know, exactly how to use it. It was new. And so they were, they didn't have enough confidence in using that tool. So we worked on a number of different things to build that confidence. There were some user interface issues that needed to be addressed as well. And so again, once you really understand the human need or the human pain or the challenge that they're facing, without, just relying on data, there's so many, it's like you're opening the aperture of how to solve that problem in just a really big way.
Yeah, no, I love that. And it's interesting because on another one of our episodes, we had Abigail Posner. She was a creative executive at Google, and she was also a Harvard-trained anthropologist, right? And that anthropology is what she has leveraged to get the insights needed for the future of tech and business in such a big way. And so, when you think about the teams nowadays, right? And I think about this, when you're looking at AI, a lot of times, and even the company I was with, I asked them when they're hiring me, my previous company, they were telling me that they're going through this huge digital transformation, and they have all this technology. They got AR, XR, MR, VR, AI. Robots going up walls, through pipes, underwater, fleets of drones, right? Robotic dogs. I was like, great, but how are you putting humans at the center, right? Yeah. And they said, well, that's what we need help with. And so when I dove into it, though, I realized when I look at AI, just like then, it was how companies like building this for this tech's sake, just with tech, without thinking about the human is never going to fly.
Yep.
I started thinking like, people that know user experience and behavioral science and really understand the human need really are the ones that we need more than ever right now. But when you are thinking about a team that you're building, I mean, are these some of the roles that you would want to have on it or should have on it, or just, your traditional tech roles?
I mean, that's honestly, I think, how you mentioned the connection and the click that we had. When I first met Nicola and, kind of understood her background, besides all the, creative in the film and, and the tech and the emerging, space or emerging trend space. But it was that design background. Because as I mentioned, one of the teams that I had responsibility for over the years was an innovation team that really taught me about the value of human-centered design. But then as we moved into this AI space and really kind of doubling down there, not just for innovation overall, but for like true AI innovation, the very first thing I said was like, I want to absolutely still continue to leverage human-centered design as we uncover and identify and design AI solutions. And so Nicola comes into the picture, and really that was just, such an easy, like, okay, this person has this background, this person has this belief. And to this day, that's how we think about, the solutions that we're building, is thinking about it from a human perspective, not only to understand what the need is and what we're trying to solve for, but also thinking about the solutions and building them in a way that is, really thinking about the humanity and the people that it's serving and the value that it's creating.
Yeah.
What I see coming is I think that there is an overt need in the industry for people who have more of a background in the social sciences. I think there is a need for anthropologists, for social scientists, philosophers, who is going to guide us in thinking about the ethics and the morality of the systems and the tools that we're building, if not the people who are already thinking about those things. There's actually an interesting trend that I've been seeing, that a lot of folks who are in the AI space and come from technical backgrounds and product backgrounds are actually starting to take a lot of courses and training in theology, right? So like there are a lot of very large questions that I think AI is going to force us to answer. And as businesses, I think it is responsible for us to bring in people who are thinking about the human side and the impact, the long-term impact of the social changes that are coming, the cultural changes that are coming because of this technology. And how do we design intentionally with that understanding in mind? And that's where we need more than data scientists. We need more than developers. We've got the tech folks, right? They're in the space and they're hungry for it. But we really need the human side of the house to be more overtly brought into the process. If I were building a team, or if you're building out your team right now, those would be some of the skill sets and backgrounds I'd be looking for.
Yeah, no, that's huge. And it's so amazing that you pointed out even to the theology side of things, right? And this understanding of what, this connection to the spirituality or, the religious history of the world, that's very human,
Yeah.
And double click on belief, right? And belief is a big thing, because as you were hitting on, because it's what people trust to, maybe go along the journey with you, right? And we've talked about the story and different things. So I guess, how did you maybe build belief and momentum with, these ideas that you were trying to bring across, whether it's through tech or AI, and especially when others weren't quite seeing the vision yet,
Yeah, I mean, it's, sometimes it's slow, and sometimes it's you think you've got people there and you're like, well, nope, gotta start over again or try another angle. But for me, it's always been whatever the new thing is, like I personally have to figure it out enough to then be able to articulate and connect with other leaders across the company. There's some new emerging things that we just recently met, about yesterday. And I'm still getting my head around it because it is this, kind of a different approach to AI and different thinking around it. And I still don't have my words down about it yet. I still haven't completely figured out like what the value will be for Southwest. So if I can't figure that out yet, or if I haven't articulated that, then I've got some more homework to do. So whether it was how we could leverage, data science, 10 years ago, or how we could leverage innovation, human-centered design at Southwest, then I still have some work to do, So I would always make sure that I could connect the dots for people that don't live in that space. Our leaders in, ground operations or flight ops or marketing, like they're running the day-to-day business of Southwest Airlines. They're not necessarily spending their time thinking about how these tools could help them, in their particular business area. And that's been my role. But it's always like, how do I make sure that I can tell that to them in a way, or articulate that to them in a way that they believe that and they can trust that to take that leap forward. Then you find that one person and that's ready to take that leap forward. You do really good work with them, and then that begins to speak for itself. It's kind of like the automation work I talked about a little while ago. You find those folks that are willing to be kind of the tip of the sword, that trust you, that believe you, and then you open the door, and then you got to walk through that door, and you have to perform, and your team has to perform. And luckily, we've had great teams and great talent across these different capabilities through the years. And so, it's finding that way in to get them to see and to trust that there could be a different way. There could be different tools, different capabilities to help them in their day-to-day business.
Very relevant and timely. Because what I think some of the things that you're looking at are like, all right, how do we get AI into the hands of people practically right now? But then what's coming, right? What's coming next? And I think, and we've talked a little bit about this, right? Because, we've seen this wave of generative AI, right? November 30th, 2022, there was the day that I say that the world, AI didn't become aware, but the world became aware of AI, right?
Yep.
ChatGPT, right? And so I think history will look back on that date as a very important date. And so this rise of generative AI now has become this new third wave of agentic AI, right? And we're, talking about agents. Some of you have met, some of the agents that, or one of the agents that we've built and stuff. But now there's this next layer that it's almost like an alternative path that could be taken with active inference, right? In AI. And is what you were referring to, right?
Yeah.
And I think, well, let's go there. Let's talk about that, right? Because it's fascinating to think about how, this whole concept had really originated back in the late 1800s and has built momentum, and now is being looked at as a potential future for us. And the combining of neuroscience with AI together in tech, right? So, I think you have shared with me some thoughts on that. So, what do you think of this new, path that we could take?
So the first I learned of this in any depth was yesterday. So it's very, very new, very fresh. Yeah. And as Angela said, I'm also still kind of wrapping my head around it. But it feels to me, going back to historical reference, similar to the discussion that they were probably having at the dawn of the electric age, right? Of, are we going to go with Tesla or are we going to go with Edison? And I think it's a similar comparison. These are fundamentally different approaches to the technology that could produce something very similar, but also hold the potential for very divergent paths forward. And there's also a future in which these two technologies merge and work together, right? Where they're going, I'm not sure yet. Again, give me a couple weeks to brush up on a little more knowledge in the space. But in our meeting yesterday, it was described in a really interesting way that, really inference and thinking about this inference-based approach is essentially the physics of learning, which is a really interesting concept, right? Especially as we think about, even now, most people seem to believe AI mirrors humanity, right? In many ways. Those of us working on the technical side, no, it doesn't. I think this technology opens up a pathway in which it truly does mirror humanity. If it mirrors the way we think and the way our brains connect information, is that a better path towards AGI? Maybe, right? So again, to me, it almost opens up more questions than it provides any answers.
Yeah, like I would love to see the combination of the agent that you just showed us this morning, Jorge, who is very human-like. And but as I understand it, the way that Jorge is and these agents are built today is through traditional AI, machine learning, and they're trained based on patterns of data that they have been trained on. And versus this active inference is in real time, these agents are adapting, they're pinging the environment around them to continue to learn and to continue to adapt. And so if you combine, the agents of today with what, this active inference capability can bring about, like it'd be super fascinating to see how those agents evolve and what, the true capability that they can get to. And so again, for us as an airline, some of the, absolutely most important things that we work on is how we recover from irregular operations. Those irregular operations, they happen every day. We have bad weather every single day somewhere. And so we are constantly making decisions around how we, accommodate for and react to and respond to whatever the, situation is. It could be a mechanical issue, it could be weather, it could be ATC, traffic, air traffic control challenges. So how we recover, and you've got 4,000 flights and, thousands of flights and aircraft in the air and crews. And there's just a lot of complexity in that. And it's real time. So if this active inference capability can get us to where, the agents are acting and responding to the environment in that real time, that is, again, kind of like this next wave. And so, so for me, it's like, okay, how do we continue to get our arms around that, but tie it to what's already capable today in these agents in this agentic AI wave, to again, start to show people and demonstrate to people, tell that story by bringing it to life in a proof of concept or proof of value to really start to get it to the place where, oh yeah, we want that. We need to be able to implement that in a bigger way. Yeah.
I mean, and I think the opportunities are huge with this, right? I mean, when you were, both sharing those things and those ideas and thoughts, I started thinking about my son, my oldest son, who's autistic, and the way his mind works, right? And it's a very interesting thing, because I started trying to, kind of analyze the pattern and he's so incredible, right? He's got all these creativity and giftings and things. But I started thinking about the world of robots and what that would look like, in the future. And so when you put an input in to a robot and it's going down the street, and the input is to cross the street, it's going to go to the corner and it'll cross the street. But what if there's construction in the middle of the street, right? So now it has to either stop or it has to go back and see, was there an input of what to do with this, right? My son, for a time, it felt like, we had to make sure that he was given the input, like, this is what's going to happen next. This is what's going to happen next, because it could be very jarring if if he experienced something that he wasn't prepared for. But over time, he self-learned stuff that we, obviously we've picked up very early. It took him a little bit of time, but to be a very adaptive, right? And that's what you're talking about right now. Real adaptation to the environment around you, no matter what, is the key. And it can help, people, right? That with special needs that might need that, but it can also really, change the way that machines and AI work with us, right?
Yeah, there's definitely this digital physical interaction, and there's some other new capabilities and emerging protocols and things, that the spatial web, and I'm not even going to attempt to try to really get into all of that, but it seems like this technology and capability is that next capability to be able to truly enable like a digital twin, and really that bringing together of the physical and the digital, because of that real-time ability to act with your environment, understand the environment. It's really truly mimicking the human brain.
It almost feels like, to me, this is the missing piece of the puzzle, right? The things that I think this will enable are things that many of us have been talking about. Like if you've been in the IoT space, we've been talking about these things for 15, 20 years. This feels like the missing piece that's actually going to supercharge that future. One of the things I've been saying a lot is I feel like we live at this amazing time where human capability from a technical standpoint has caught up with our imagination, and the things that we have literally been dreaming of for generations, in some cases hundreds if not thousands of years, are fully possible today.
Yeah.
And it's an astounding time to be alive.
To some people, very exciting. And to others, it can be quite daunting, maybe a little bit of intimidating and some scary, right? And some just look at AI as a tool, whereas we're talking about it as an adaptive, actual, like almost being, if you will. And so if you, kind of think about the people that think about it as a tool, which, is true. There are many AI tools right now, so many to keep up with. It's not, I guess it's not just a tool, to me and to us, right? It's really a mindset shift, right? And so, and this is really to both of you. I mean, how do you bring people along when it feels unfamiliar, when it feels intimidating, when it feels like it's overwhelming, or like I can't wrap my head around this,
Yeah. One of the very first generative AI solutions that we implemented at Southwest was in a group that we refer to as customer engagement. So think about it as customer relations after travel care. When customers, have some sort of issue or complaint that they, want to bring to our attention, it might be asking for a refund. This team handles and services all of those complaints. And so we built a lot of solutions to kind of handle that end-to-end process, but one of which was a generative AI solution to help respond and write that first draft back to the customer. And so helping them with, the time that it takes them to sit and write, a long response back to the customer. So that was our very first use of generative AI. But what we discovered along the way is we've been leveraging tools through the years, all the way back to the late 1990s. And one of our beloved leaders of all time, Colleen Barrett, who was responsible for this customer relations group at one point in time. I found this old memo that she had written, and it was all about, again, with the tools that were available to them at that time, which was what she called a form book. And basically, she just took the kind of best written responses from across the different agents that they had, and she, put them in a binder, like a physical binder. And then the employees were able to kind of point to those to help them write their responses back to the customer. They had something to model their work after. And I found that, and I was able to share that with the leaders and the people in this organization that were, going through this new generative AI solution that could take their job. And it's like, hold on, like we've been doing this kind of a thing because we always have to be looking for ways that how could we be more efficient? How can we provide a better customer experience? How can we provide a better experience for our employees? Again, back to some of those things they may not want to do. So understanding what they want to do and what they, what the things that they don't mind like getting off of their plate, but being able to point back to one of our most, influential, most customer-centered leaders, of our time at Southwest. She was doing the same thing. She just did it with the tools that were available to her at that time. We have AI now. We have all of this, massive capability. We need to take advantage of it. So bringing that to life, I think, was helpful for people to see that, we're just continuing to do, what our company has always done and drive efficiency. And that's a core part of who we are is efficiency. Yeah. And so just different tools, different technologies available for us to do that today.
Yeah. And you made it relevant. You made it, connected to, their daily life.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that's probably the key. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So over the years, I've working in emerging spaces. Majority of my job was convincing brands that these were things to invest in or at least experiment with. Part of that, I think, is demystifying it and decoupling the story and the benefit from the tech. Most leaders are not technology leaders. They shouldn't have to be, and they shouldn't have to understand the technical infrastructure or the architecture or even any technical terms, honestly, in order to see the value in the product and to understand how to use it. And so what I would say is part of it is if you're building internal tools, you need to approach them with an external marketing mindset in regards to your communication. How would you communicate the value of this product to a consumer who is not going to understand your processes, the back, what's happening behind the curtain? What would that messaging be? And remove the technology from it. And for example, we're working on a product now, and the team were putting, communications together, and they wanted to talk about tokenization and the number of tokens you would use. And I was like, nowhere in any of our communication should the word token show up.
Right.
Yeah.
None of our users should need to know that information. If they do and they have questions, great, we can answer them. Sure. But they shouldn't have to understand tokenization to know the best way to use this tool, right? So demystify it, remove the technical speak, and show people. And sometimes that might not be showing them things you've done because you haven't done them yet. Yeah. Show them what others are doing. Yeah. Right? Give them examples out in the market of how this is driving business change. Maybe in other industries is even more important than looking at your competitive set. Because in my mind, if you're just doing what your competitive set is doing, you've kind of lost anyway. Where you look for real opportunity is outside of your own industry. But if there's proof points and use cases and proven ROI in other verticals, there's no reason we couldn't replicate that within our own vertical or our own use cases. And then part of it, I think, is ongoing exposure to those things. You can't just tell them that story once. You have to keep showing them because these spaces are evolving, right? So the story we told you last week, especially in this space, may not be the story we're going to tell you next week, right? Yeah. Active inference, we might be telling you a completely different story and directing the business in a completely different direction in a year's time based on that technology or quantum computing or something else that's coming down the line, right? So,
well, and back to they don't spend their days thinking about that. They spend their days thinking about how they're going to drive more revenue and how they're going to acquire more customers or turn airplanes faster and on time, so they have a whole different set of things that they're responsible for on a daily basis. And so for us to expect them to care about tokenization or to remember, the story that we told them 2 weeks, I mean, you do have to remind and you do have to retell and find additional and creative ways to retell the story and the value.
Looking at all these technologies, and you're now in a place where you're beginning to bring people along and stuff. I think, you've kind of hit on something I think is really powerful, which is, it's really the core skill that's needed is empathy for, again, for the users of AI, and in our company, we kind of say the same thing, right? We're like, hey, look, I mean, you don't need to know about all the millions of tools or the credits or tokens or anything like that. You don't need to know if it's, or worry about, whether it's agentic or generative, all that we can take care of all that, But what we do want to worry about together is how does this become relevant for people, right? And how do you build something that's supportive, right? So when you think about building AI that feels supportive or not threatening to real people's work, I mean, how do you do that?
I mean, some of the design thinking methodology, I think you could even consider it, just looking at these end-to-end processes, but it's really sitting in their seat, walking in their shoes, going to their environment and seeing what they have to do to, ultimately deliver a product or a service to our customers. Like the customer engagement example that I gave, we sat with those groups. We listened to the conversations. We watched the process all the way from the customer, and their journey when they submit their information and till they get the response back to the employee, what they have to do to handle that particular, complaint. And that's when you start to see their pain and you start to hear from them, well, this is when I have to go to 19 different systems to go research exactly what happened. And it's like, oh, maybe an AI could do that. maybe there's a way that we could automate that research process. So just again, working with the people that are in that process, understanding what they do, hearing from them, their pain points, that just starts to open up, all of the solutioning and ideas and ways in which you can solve for that. And that's where I love the idea of, we're not just here to think about how AI could solve for that. Do we not have the right skill sets on the team? Do we have a broken process that is making you do things that you just shouldn't be doing anymore? And so really kind of thinking about all the tools in the toolkit as you're understanding and hearing their pain points, their desires, their needs, is where you come out with great solutions.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what you're hitting on there is truly, responsible AI, really caring for people, but also making sure that AI is relevant and works, and I think, the thing you highlighted there again is another theme around, the need for this design thinking or design background and stuff. And that's very much your background, right? And, when you look through that lens, right, and you think about all of these things, I know you mentioned some of it, but really, how does creativity and ethics shape the way that you approach responsible AI?
So, from an ethical perspective, we have a very robust and strong governance team, which helps create some guidelines that give us a bit of an ethical structure to how we approach it. For me personally, it is about looking at the human need and thinking about the longer term human impacts. Prior to Southwest, I was at a consultancy. And part of the reason I wanted to come to Southwest was the brand is very human focused and human centric. But part of what disturbed me about the conversations we were having on the consulting side of the house with mostly customers on the leading tech at very large brands was we were hearing things like, and this is a direct quote, "We are giddy about the number of jobs we're going to be able to cut because of this technology." And it just struck me as short-sighted. I don't see a world, at least in the near term, where especially large businesses, very large businesses, can function without humans. Yeah. I think it's possible in the future. We have humanless companies at scale or at what scale, I'm not sure. But I also worry about the societal impact of those types of decisions if they're made by every large company, if they're only viewing this technology as a mechanism of cutting jobs, right? And I feel like it also does a disservice to the potential of the technology and the potential of humans plus the technology together. And so to me, there are some broad ethical questions, but I also think if you just stepped back and looked at them, you can tell that those are fundamentally the wrong direction for us to be taking this technology, taking society, because what does a world look like in which 70% of people are unemployed? Not a world I want to live in. The ethics, I think, in some ways is on an individual level, but is also in part determined by how ethical is your organization overall. Do they think about humans in their broader decision-making? If that's not already part of your DNA, I think it'll be hard to have a truly ethical approach to AI if you're not having a broadly ethical approach to business.
And I think there's big ethics, which is kind of really, where you just went down. But you started with, we do have an AI governance team. And their role is to probably focus on more of the here and now today, ethics and responsibility. And, so there's very specific things discrimination, algorithmic discrimination that can come into play if you're using the AI to screen resumes or to help you hire people. And so there, like I was saying, there's big ethics, what does this mean for the future? But then there are very practical, tactical things that we have to really understand with you start to get into, data privacy and, customer information and employee information, and then how you're using all of that to train models or what business decisions that you're making. So there's, again, kind of big, broad scale, but then very practical, tactical things that we have to think about as a company to make sure that we're being responsible in how we're using and leveraging the AI.
And I don't know that there's broad standards yet, right? We're still in the infancy of this space, but similar to GDPR, eventually, and probably in the nearish future, I think we will end up with some standards that will help guide the ethical component of it. The creativity side, I think, is a whole other animal to talk about. I've got a lot of friends in the creative space. I've got friends who are filmmakers, graphic designers, copywriters, right? Kind of actual visual artists. There's a lot of debate in the creative community. There are a ton of people who feel extraordinarily threatened by this technology. In some capacity, it's valid. It is very easy, for example, to do, create beautiful images now with Sora. I think, though, what we'll see is that AI artists will emerge. People who learn the craft of putting a prompt together to generate a piece of what I would still consider to be human art. It will become another medium. So you might, in the same way we have graphic designers, and back in the day, you probably remember graphic designers were not considered artists, right? And if you created a piece of art using graphic design, people would not consider that art. Right. Now, you have digitally created images in galleries selling for millions of dollars. I think we'll end up in the same place with AI. And I think what you may end up with is a bit of a stratification in the creative world of human-created content and art, and then a lower tier, essentially, of AI-created art. And I think you're already seeing this in the film space, even with kind of certain directors choosing to go with practical effects over CGI. Like Nosferatu came out last year. Every single thing in that movie is a practical effect. There is no CGI, right? It is considered film, not just a movie. And I think that we'll see that same type of stratification in the creative space of this was fully human created, this was human CGI created, this was human AI created, this was completely AI created. So it's going to be an interesting time.
I think it gets back to like these things become additive versus just replacing or, completely like eliminating something. I mean, I just recently used, AI for like a really silly, funny thing, but it was to create a t-shirt for, this funny thing that we were doing with my daughter and one of her, her lacrosse team, whatever. But like, it's something that without AI and how I leveraged it there to create this t-shirt design, like I probably just wouldn't have done it. Like, because it was a quick turn. I don't have a graphic designer like friend, that I could just call and like say, help me create this. I know now that I know this, but it just would have been something that I would have said, great idea, but like not enough time, and I won't do it. But because I had this available to me, and it like very quickly like designed exactly like in like seconds what we wanted this t-shirt to be. Like we were able to like then do that, and we had t-shirts made, and we showed up with 500 t-shirts for this event, and it was like the hit, and there was like, how did you do that? But again, I probably wouldn't have done that. So it's again, that's a very kind of simple example, but it can become additive and adding on to something that maybe just wouldn't have happened otherwise.
Well, it's a great example of how it's enabling creativity at the individual level for folks who may not have had that skill set in their arsenal before. And now they do. And I don't know, I find it hard to argue that a world in which more people are being creative is bad.
No, I mean, I think that would be, it's amazing, right? I mean, think about the things that we can all do together, right? And every single human is creative in their own way and in their own special uniqueness. And I think that's what makes us human is because we are all unique in some way or another, and we have our own way to get to that, even those that, work with numbers, they can be very creative with those numbers as well. But, it reminds me of this thought I had, like when you think about, our role then, right, as humans in the loop, like everybody says, right, you have this AI then doing the creative work. So it actually created the design. It thought of things that you didn't think of, and it outputs it, right? And you look at it. What is our role then? And so it seems that our role now, or will be, more of the quote unquote creative director role, or the approver of, because you looked at that and you said, no, I don't like that. Maybe I'm going to change the prompt, or no, that's not, right. Or that's awesome. I want that. Now I'm going to approve that. And then you're the promoter of it, right?
Yeah.
Because you're the one to get out there. Like now AI one day, will, and can right now, we've got an agent workflow that can, curate all these headlines, put them into a spreadsheet, a GPT, or LLM can then pull that and then craft new messages and tweets and then send it right out there. But we've now become this, multiplied, enabler of the abilities that AI has given us to do. And we're, I guess, looking at the creative direction and approval. So, I mean, is that kind of where you see things going,
Yeah. And I mean, I think you just sparked a different thought, around the workflow, like what you just described wasn't just like one piece of the workflow that you could automate or leverage AI to do something. It's that workflow. And so again, maybe bringing in the creativity, it's like, what are all the different ways that we can, look at an entire workflow, and how could the agents, really, navigate that entire workflow? Because we've looked at things in the past, around like, oh, well, a drone could come in and it could take pictures of the aircraft and identify, dents in the aircraft, or where we need to, paint, or, things like that. But as like one piece of an overall workflow, it's been harder to get traction. So I'm looking forward to, because agents now are capable of, really acting upon an entire workflow, hoping that now it's a little bit easier for business areas to see like, oh, okay, there's more value there. And sometimes if you're just addressing one piece, it might mean more work for you to kind of like deal with that one piece, where if you can really string together through, looking at a process creatively and using your imagination, like somebody said earlier, like if you can imagine it now, it's almost like you're pretty sure that you can actually make that happen with all of the capabilities that we have. So leveraging the imagination, the creativity of how can all of these things come together in an entire workflow, I think it takes you kind of really to that next step of people like being able to, okay, I understand now what AI is, and like you can do my whole workflow for me. Like, yes, I'm in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and you're, obviously, hitting on the point of like what a lot of people think that, and believe that AI is going to be helpful for is to really increase that productivity, right? But when you put it in the context of business, and I mean, whatever company you're in, at the end of the day, like, that workflow is key, right?
Yeah.
But that productivity is key, but what is the ROI, right? How do you look at that? Like and how do you define success, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's so many different ways you can define success, and depending on who you're, answering to, it can be financial, it can be employee experience, it can be customer satisfaction and customer experience. And so, I think it's harder to financially put a number on the experience side of things. But ideally, if you can put a number to that and put a dollar to that, I think that is, the perfect world. But I think it's a mix. And I think we've thought about it in terms of like, okay, if you're going to go work on 5-10 different things that, we're going to fund and invest in, not every single one of those has to have a financial outcome, but overall, from a portfolio perspective, we really need to make sure that the overall portfolio is driving X amount of ROI in dollars. And then, Nicola mentioned earlier some of the GPT, solutions that we're working on. It's just really hard to measure like productivity that's starts to become so pervasive in what people are doing every day. But again, back to the portfolio, if the portfolio overall can articulate a certain value, maybe not every single individual item or, effort or project has to have a dollar value associated to it.
Yeah. And I would also, just adding to that, say, again, we're in the infancy of this space. What I'm seeing broadly is people really looking at efficiency, right, as the primary success metric. In some cases, I think that's the right metric. In many other cases, I think it's a starting foundational metric, but it's probably not a true metric of success. And the best example I have of this right now is marketing, right? Could we increase efficiency in marketing through the use of AI tools? 100%. Can we increase throughput and the number of campaigns produced? 100%. Is the quality of those campaigns good? Is it actually going to drive conversion? Mm-hmm. Is it actually going to drive, the types of click-throughs or whatever your metrics are for the campaign? Is it effective in that end goal? Because if you're driving a ton more throughput, but it's not actually driving conversion, is it a success? I'd argue no, right? So I think this is where, because we're so early, we're using the most rudimentary metric, the easiest thing to measure, which is time saving. Sure. Did this save you time? Yep, great. Did it give you the quality of the output? Maybe, maybe not. So I feel like we're still in the very early stages of truly defining what type of ROI can we expect out of these tools. And I would also say, like, one of the key metrics that I think we are looking at, and we need to be telling the story maybe better, is risk mitigation, right? So we talk about AI as an additive and how it enhances all these things, and it does all of those things, but it also can prevent a ton of risk depending on your industry and the business that you're in. And that is quantifiable too, right? So I think it's a really complex space that we have not largely, not Southwest, but as an industry in general, those in the AI space, I don't think we've actually cracked the code on how to measure it, what success actually looks like, or even really thinking about success at the use case level and customizing it to that. But that's probably where we need to go.
Yeah, no, that's huge, right? The use case and, maybe even, starting small in some ways and, and piloting and looking at a piece of the entire workflow and saying, this is where we're going to start now. I mean, is that kind of the way you see it would be most effective?
Yeah. I mean, again, I'm a big fan of looking at the end to end. But that doesn't mean that you have to go implement everything. I just believe that if you just focus on this one thing, and we lived this, like, again, back to the customer engagement effort that we worked on. If we would have just done this one thing at the end, like, we would have missed a lot of opportunities upstream to make that downstream process. It's a bit of like a whack-a-mole. It's like you can fix this thing, but something's going to pop out somewhere else. So at least understanding your opportunities. But then again, but you're right. I mean, you can't go boil the ocean and do everything. So, but understanding the bigger picture, understanding that user, experience, doing that user research to understand as much of the end-to-end as you can, but then starting, you're right. It's you can't do everything all at once. So,
like the movie, right? Everything, everywhere, all at once.
Yeah,
yes. One thing I will say as well, though, and again, I think this also comes to just being in the very early stages, is right now what I see is a lot of companies taking AI and simply replacing an existing process with AI, but keeping the whole process the same, right? And this is a fundamentally transformative technology. And what I love about stepping back and looking at the whole process is, in some ways, it also calls to question of, like, is this even the way this process should work, given the fact that we have access to tools that can do very different things than what we had 6 months ago, a year ago? And what I love about being able to look at the entire process is that although we can't always reshape the entire thing front to back, it at least gives us a starting point of assessing that and challenging some of our core assumptions, which to me is really about like, does this process need to work this way at all?
Right.
Yeah.
Or could we reinvent it as we're looking at how we implement some of these tools? And sometimes the answer is yes, right? If it's a smaller process or it's something like marketing, maybe we could. If you're looking at your whole ops for running an airline, you're probably not going to just overhaul that entire process. You're going to probably start small, right? So again, I think it's very use case focused as to, do you think about AI as a mechanism of overhauling the entire process? Or do you start small because it's so complex and we can kind of solve a piece of the problem while understanding the whole and work towards a more consolidated solution?
And I think that's like also just a core aspect of design thinking, human-centered design, is really knowing that the question that you're trying to answer, or, again, the problem that you're trying to solve. And really good example of that was during, COVID, when there was nobody in the airports, nobody on our planes, and we started to slowly like think about, okay, how do we get people comfortable? Because if you go into an airport and you have to touch a kiosk, and if you have to touch a kiosk in the middle of the early days of COVID, so one of our leaders came to our team and actually came to from a process perspective, like, what's the fastest way that we can clean these screens so that customers feel like it's okay to touch it, to do their check-in and what they need to do to, go onto the airplane. And so, but we stepped back from like a human-centered design thing. It's like, hold on, like, what are we actually trying to do here? Are we really trying to clean this thing as fast as possible? Or if you frame the question in the right way, what we were really trying to do was we were trying to instill confidence in, with our customers that it was safe to fly with us, whether it was the kiosk or being on the aircraft or whatever. And so, again, it just opens the aperture to what you're, actually trying to solve for in such a broad way that it gets you out of just, your thinking and your frame of, reference, or your frame of, what you're solving for, goes from this really narrow space to, wow, like maybe we don't need to clean it at all. We need to do, so that, to me, I think is just a really fundamental aspect of, as you're approaching any opportunity, whether you think it's big or whether you think it's small.
What's like the thing that you hope that people that you've mentored or the people that you've led, continue to carry on? And
I mean, it might sound repetitive because it's been a lot of what we've talked about today, but it's, whether through my career, whether it's been, I've called it, thinking about the end-to-end process, or whether it's design thinking, or whether what problem that you're trying to solve. Like, these are all, you're trying to constantly find, like, what's the phrase that's going to stick, or what's the, or strategy, regardless of the term or the word. For me, like, I would love for, Southwest Airlines to say, wow, what Angela taught us is that rather than just jumping right in to solve for this thing because we know what the answer is or we know what the solution is, like, let's take the appropriate amount of time to step back and make sure that we understand what it is that we're solving for. And whether that's, mapping a process on the wall, or whether that's user research and going to the Gemba, or whatever, all the terminology that you want to use, it's to make sure that, you really step back and understand what we're solving for. And it seems very simple, because if you do that, like, you're creating like durable solutions, you're creating lasting impact versus just, sometimes, you get in a crunch and it's like, we got to cut 10%, we got to do, and it's like, but those are temporary fixes. And I feel like if you step back and you take that time up front, you create durable, lasting solutions. But it's hard because not everybody believes in that, or not everybody wants to take the time, or we don't have time for that. Like, we know what the answer is. And so I feel like I've spent a lot of time and political capital and just, energy and would love for, people to kind of look back on that and say, yeah, she was always the one that was telling us we should do that. And so, maybe there's, probably other things that I would throw into that. But based on everything we've talked today, that's kind of top of mind.
It kind of, reminds me again of going back to that, the story, the legacy that you're leaving and the story that you're telling, And so, Nicola, what do you want your story to tell in the next 5 years?
I would love for my story, at least around AI, to be hopefully that I'm one of the voices driving us towards a positive future with AI. And if I can have a small part in driving us towards that instead of the possible dystopian futures that people keep talking about, I will feel like I've done my part.
Wow. I love that. That's what I hope for too. So last few questions, lightning round, right? Mm-hmm. Just going to throw these out there. Just you as a leader, as a person, what's one risk that you're glad you took?
Trying all these different capabilities and, garnering that support, like going to sell these ideas. I've always felt like at Southwest, I've been there a long time, but we were talking about this morning, like very different journeys, but I feel like I've been able to continue to learn and take on new things and almost have like this startup mentality within a safe place of a corporate environment. So I love that I've been able to kind of take those risks over the years to, one, keep my learning and all of my outside perspective fresh, but again, still within that safe environment. So it's maybe calculated risks or measured risks to be able to help our company stand up some of those new capabilities that not everybody at the time could see the value, but they you get to a point where they can believe in it, and then you take the risk, you invest in it, and stand it up. And so glad that I've been able to take those risks over the years.
Yeah, a true entrepreneur, right?
Yeah.
Had to really fight for those ideas that you had.
Right.
Nicola, what about you? What's one risk?
All of them.
Yeah.
All of them. My whole
it.
career has been taking risks, and I don't regret any of them. They were all great learning experiences. On the individual level, I would say take as many risks as you can.
Okay. That's good advice. Really good advice. So, maybe a book, a quote, an idea that changed the way you lead.
Yeah. So it's like, sometimes you can say it in terms of like, there's enough sun to shine on everybody. You can talk about it from a scarcity or a growth mindset. I've just learned through the years that, that quote of there is enough sun to shine on everybody. Because I think you get into these environments and like you can get into, competitive kind of, like I want to deliver this thing, but like at the end of the day, there's so many things to be solved for and so many good things that can be done and delivered. There should be enough, credit and enough sun for everybody. And so I think early days of, the career, it's like, oh, how can I win? But it's like, you got to be in it for the long run, and you've got to understand that it's not a zero-sum game. Like, if, and it helps you lead to, being a more collaborative leader, being a more, just open. And if you're not threatened by, somebody else winning, because we can all win, then I think that's just something that I've really kind of held near and dear and have learned and tried to emulate over the years.
That's really, really good. And Nicola?
Yeah, so I was actually going to say that Angela, I think, has modeled some amazing leadership skills. That's one of the lessons I had already learned from some others, but you really reinforced for me, especially this is the first time I've ever worked internal at a big brand. So knowing that as I was coming to work with you was also very enlightening. And another lesson that I've learned from you in our short time together is not being afraid of bringing folks onto your team who know more than you, right? And that is actually one of the best ways to succeed is bringing people smarter than you, bring in people who know the things you don't know, who have the strengths you don't have. And then the last thing I'll say, and something that's kind of guided my career and again has been modeled for me because I've had amazing leaders and amazing bosses, lift as you climb. And I think it goes along with there's enough sun for all of us, is if you happen to be lucky enough to be in a position of power, part of your responsibility is lifting others up with you.
Wow. I love that.
Yeah, I do too. I love that. Yeah. It's, like you said, bringing people on that have different skill sets, and that can feel threatening. I mean, I've always said, like, I've led a data science team and I am not a data scientist. I discovered this design thinking along the way from people that, were on my team, that it's like, wow, this is powerful, but I am not that expert. But that doesn't, it takes a minute to get comfortable with that, but that doesn't mean that you can't then go be an advocate for that and be a champion for what these different capabilities can do. So yeah, I hadn't thought about that one a little bit. Yeah, but that is, I think, a key thing, being able to surround yourself with really smart people. It can be threatening at times, but yeah, it's, I think it's definitely the way to go. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, this show's been about, the potential that we have as humans and how we prompt that, right? How do we enable that? How do we, foster that creativity, that human view of the world, a human-centered view of the world, and through what we call prompting potential. So lastly, I'm going to ask you both to finish this sentence. Prompting potential means.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to that, like, take that risk to try something new, to show people and inspire people of what the potential is. But you have to spur that. You have to prompt that in a way that gets people excited, gets people to see and understand, like, what this thing could be. So bringing that to life, and not just talking about it, not just like contemplating it, but like really like driving the action to make that thing happen, to prompt it and bring it to life. You used the word manifest earlier today, and but it's like you almost have to like manifest some of these things by showing and proving and bringing to life.
I love that. Prompting potential means?
Prompting potential means enabling people to go beyond their limits and the things they've already done. Driving creativity and curiosity. If you're creative and curious, I feel like there's nothing you can't do, especially in this new world we're entering.
Oh, wow. That's really good. Both of you, thank you so much. This has been amazing, right? I don't want it to end. So maybe there's a part 2 in the future, if y'all are up for it, or part 3, 4, or 5, whatever. Or you could send your AI versions of you, and then we could do that too. But Angela, Nicola, I mean, thank you both for, the thoughtful, the powerful, the really meaningful words that you've given to us today and to our viewers. It's truly a masterclass in how to lead with both vision and heart, and to put humans at the center. I guess, for all of you listening in today, if, this conversation sparked an idea, a shift in mindset, or just a fresh way to think about possibility, that's the beginning of your own transformation. And so until next time, keep prompting your potential.